始まった。まだ練習セッションですけど、もうそろそろですね。始まった。始まりました。Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Stimson Center's webinar. Actually, good morning, good evening, wherever you are signing on to. My name is Yuki Tatsumi. I'm a co-director of East Asia program and the director of Japan program at Stimson Center. We are letting everyone into this webinar room, so we'll get started in a couple of minutes. So for those of you who have been already in this live stream, if you can hold on tight for a few minutes, we'll get started right away. Okay, I think I'm sure people start trickling in, but we're gonna go ahead and get started since we only have an hour. Good evening for those of you who are signing on from Asia, and good morning for everyone who's signing in from the United States. Welcome to the Stimson Center Japan Program's webinar series that looks at the significant issues and trends on Japanese national security strategy. Couple of weeks ago, we hosted the Dr. Yuichi Hosoya from Keio University, who talked about Japan's role as one of the countries that leads the world's effort to uphold the existing liberal international order. Today's webinar will focus a little bit more closely on Japan's alliances and partnerships and how those relationships have evolved since the 2022 national security strategies are released. Today, I am so happy to host Dr. Chikako Kawakatsu Ueki, who is a professor of Waseda University. But for the time being, lucky for me, she's closer to me now. She is doing a visiting scholar at that position at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She is very well known in Japan as one of the leading scholar on the alliance theory and the security policy and Indo-Pacific regional affairs. Dr. Ueki is, like I said, is currently a visiting scholar at the MIT Security Studies program, but her mothership is at Waseda University, where she serves as the professor at the Graduate School of Asia Pacific Studies. She specializes in political science, international relations, security studies, and international relations and security of East Asia, and U.S.-Japan-China relations. Previously, she held the positions at the Asahi Shimbun, Peking University, and also Japan Ministry of Defense National Institute of Defense Studies. The way it's going to go is I would open up the session by asking Dr. Ueki 3 opening questions to which she would answer for a few minutes. And after that, we'll get right into Q&A with you for those who are participating in the audience. For those of you in the audience, if you would like to pose a question, please do not use chat function. Use only Q&A function, because chat function is actually reserved for amongst us, meaning myself, Chikako-san, and our Stimson Center staff, in the unlikely event of some technical difficulties that arises that needs to be addressed. So please do post all your questions in Q&A, and I will do my best to pick up as many as I can in the time that are allowed to us in a question and answers. So with that, Chikako-san, good morning and welcome.
Morning.
How's the weather? How's the weather in Boston?
Okay, it's really sunny and it's warm for maybe
Oh, good. So
it's been
yes,
under 0 for a long time, freezing, but today it's sunny and warm, so I'm very happy.
Oh, great. Yeah, no, we're
And
having
thank you so very much for having me. It's really
great.
a great pleasure
No,
being on the
honor's
webinar with
mine.
you.
Yeah, I've been wanted to do this. So finally we get to do this. I'm so
Okay.
happy.
Oh,
I'm so
lovely.
excited about today's
Yes,
session.
yes, thank you.
So just by so first let me open this session up with asking you this question. So as we know, Japan has released its latest national security strategy and two other defense policy planning documents, a defense strategy and a defense buildup plan in December 2022. And it's been roughly a year and a few months since the document has been out. So what do you see as the impacts of this most recent rendition of these strategy documents that Japan has issued on its actual policy so far?
Okay, thank you, Yuki-san. And I'd like to say good morning to everybody and good evening. It must be very late at night in Japan or wherever you are, good afternoon. But thank you very much once again and for having me and also for those of you who I cannot see but participating on the webinar. So thank you, Yuki-san, for that question. I'd like to go back a little bit and talk about the sort of the background of why the national security strategy was written up because it has impacts on the policies that followed. And I think the objective of why was revised or put up in 2022 was to update the 2013 National Security Strategy. And by updating, meaning by two things. One is to respond to the new security, excuse me, environment in the region, and then also to reflect on the new laws that Japan had passed in 2015. So what are the changes and how did the national security impact on the remedies to the security situation that Japan saw? And one is that the realization that the balance of power in Western Pacific was changing. And then also there were improvements in the missiles, both in range and in the trajectory that the missiles fly. So they were much more complicated than before, meaning that it was difficult to intercept by missile defense system. And also a tremendous impact was the war on Ukraine, Russian aggression against Ukraine, that had people become very concerned about what might happen in the region. So people were asking in Japan, could China be next Russia? Could Taiwan be next Ukraine? That was some analogies that people put in. And also the statement by Admiral Davidson back in 2021 that the war might be quite soon by 2027. I think that made people quite jumpy and then concerned, and the sense of urgency was there. So in some ways, the national security strategy was written to respond to the new sort of a threat perception, as it were, by Japan. And I think, I mentioned about the improvement of the missiles and balance of power was specific, but this had a very serious or significant impact on the alliance as it stood before that point, which means that the US-Japan alliance had long been said to be a grand bargain during the Cold War, where Japan accepts and gives access to the bases in Japan to the US forces, and US in return sort of has a commitment to defend Japan if it were under attack. So the fact that the missiles were getting more sophisticated meant that the bases were no longer as safe as they used to be, right? And also the fact that the Western Pacific balance of power was changing meant that the Seventh Fleet, which was a very guarantor of security in the region, meant that they might not be able to operate in the waters that they used to be able to operate very safely in the past. So that meant the overhaul of the US-Japan alliance was necessary. I spent a lot of time talking, but so what it did, I think a lot of things have had an impact, and so the security laws of the 2015 allow Japan to do much more with its ally, the United States, and with its partners in the case of either the defense of Japan or to make sure that the region stayed safe. So there are, of course, limitations, but nevertheless, that allowed Japan to do more exercises together, which the assumption was that Japan will be doing operations together with these countries in varying degrees if there were a conflict in the region. Should I stop there or should I go on? should I go on? Okay, all right, okay. So what it did do, the biggest thing that was often in the news was that Japan had decided to have the strike capabilities, which were the Tomahawk cruise missiles. And Japan had already put in the budget to buy 400, and there has been a contract made with the US company to buy 400 Block 5 and Block 4 Tomahawk missiles. And Japan has also established a new kind of aid, which is called official security assistance, which is different from the developing aid that Japan already has and have been using. So what OSDA does is to allow Japan to give not weapons in the sense of firepower, but other kind of military equipment like patrol boats, surveillance ships to the countries, and not to just the non-military, but to the military services themselves. So that was put in the national security strategy. And also the fundamental reinforcement defense capability was put in place. And I think it was being in the news a lot, but Japan had always kept the defense budget to go below or about 1% of its gross national product, GDP, development product, but domestic product rather. But it has decided to raise that to about 2% by the end of the fifth fiscal year, so in 5 years. So that was a tremendous increase, and that had a lot of impact on the alliance and the partnership, the OS in particular. So I think we're already. Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Sorry. So I think that is a great segue into because my next question was exactly that. It's like, what concrete initiatives that we have seen so far. So you already kind of partly answered the question, but I think I wonder what types of things that you've seen in the context of the U.S.-Japan alliance, because obviously a lot of things has changed, and then also one of the hallmark was restructuring somehow of the self-defense forces, joint, I guess, JJOC is like joint operation commands. I guess Japan Joint Operations Command set up and so forth. So including those, what are the other concrete stuff that you've seen? And then I think that the OSA that you pointed out is actually pretty groundbreaking, because as I recall, Japan's past practices is they call it like a capacity building assistance. And, they use the different words like a strategic use of ODA, and those equipments are transferred, but still within the framework of ODA. But then now those things are probably put in this OSA category. So I thought that was, that was actually quite an important development. But, if there are any additional concrete things that you have seen.
Okay, let me talk a bit more about the OSA though, because that is something that we see as a change from the previous policies, as you mentioned. And so, the capacity building has been a policy for Japan and also the United States for a long time, and it was in place from the 2010s. Right. And so Japan had this policy, but it wasn't really staffed very heavily, and there were limitations to what Japan can do. Now, Japan had chosen countries like Philippines. Okay, let me see. Philippines, Bangladesh, Malaysia, Fiji already this fiscal year, and have chosen other countries like Mongolia, Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, Djibouti, and Papua New Guinea for the next fiscal year. So as I said, a lot of things is tailored toward the maritime domain awareness. So patrol boats, surveillance boats, and this again was concreting something that had already been in place some, but not really being effectively pursued, which was like Minister Nakatani had said a Shangri-La Dialogue Initiative almost 10 years ago, saying that maritime domain awareness, sharing that in the region would help enhance maritime security and also safety at sea. So this is really helping the countries not just to be strong enough to take care of their own problems, but also to collect the information and share it together with other countries, which the hope is so that the region would be safer. So this is sort of putting the freedom of navigation and safety at sea is sort of in practice by giving these assistance to these countries. Let me talk a bit more about the alliance, though, because that's the main focus also together with the partners. As you said, the Joint Command is already the bill to reform the Ministry of Defense has been put to the Diet in February, just this month. So it will be discussed in the Diet in the following months. So Japan is setting up, which will be headed by the 4-star general. And the idea is one of the reason why it's doing that is to have better connectivity with the US as well. So Japan, having decided to have the strike capability, counter-strike capability, is something very, what's the word? A big change from its previous defense policy, because it had always had a very defensive weapons, and it was something long-range strike capability was something that Japan had not had and decided not to have for a long time. Although under the constitution, since the 1950s, it has been argued that it's not against the constitution. Nevertheless, Japan had decided not to, mainly because United States was the provider of that capability. So in order for the strike capability to function, you need to be able to find targets, obviously. And because this is for deterrence, this has to be against the will of the other country. So it's very important that you actually have a good target or a potential good target, so that the other side would think twice or never think again about attacking Japan. So Japan doesn't have the capability on its own to find targets, and then also to make sure that the target is there and shoot, and then also do the assessment afterwards of whether the target has been destroyed or not, to look at the following operations to follow. So obviously this is a very high-end operation that needs a very close cooperation with the United States forces. So the idea is, how do you do that when missiles can fly within minutes? So you need to make decisions, you need to find targets, you need to decide whether or not to actually shoot within a very short range of time. So this is something that is it's still in the process. So nothing has happened. The discussion is going on. It's not reported clearly what is actually being discussed to the outside. On the US side, the Congress has asked the Defense Department of Defense to come up with its own headquarters in the Indo-Pacific as a commanding post, and that is to be decided by June of this year, and also to be implemented by October. So the time frame is quite short. So that's something that's been going on.
Thank you. And then I think that I'm already seeing a couple of questions coming in. So I think this will be my last question to you, and then I start picking up questions from the audience. So as you laid out, there are quite a bit going on. And some, since the new national security strategy came out, and we already seen some concrete things that has been already implemented by the government of Japan, sometimes together with the United States, and in other cases, Japan reaching out to other security partners. So moving forward, what do you see as the roadblock or headwinds as you see it?
I think there are several things that we need to keep in mind, which is, I think a lot of being done between the two defense organizations quite well. And that's because of the change of the laws and the strategy, and the defense strategy also, national defense. This has allowed Japan to work more closely with the alliance. But it's also the case that there has been very much public debate or political debate in Japan or probably in the United States as well, and also between the allies of and the political side uh, of really discussing about what is to be done if the conflict breaks out. So that is something I would imagine that needs to be worked out. And I think, I said this was to reflect the changes that happened in the region, and I mentioned about the increasing threats in the region, namely the national security strategy identifies North Korea, China, and Russia, but China has been much more of the focus of the strategy. But the second reason why we're seeing so many partnerships forming in the region and alliance is not just with Japan, but we have the Quad, we have the AUKUS, and we have different arrangement in the region, is that there is a fear of abandonment by the United States and the fear of US withdrawal from the region. So I think I think on that score, Japan, together with its allies and partners, will need to alleviate the burden that US has in the region so that US and the people of the United States feel that it is to their benefit to stay in the region, but also on the part of the US in order to reassure the countries, including Japan, is to reassure that its commitment. And one of the ways it can do that, I know that the American people is probably tired of Japanese saying that, but to join the TPP trade agreement, which was put together by the United States as a leadership under President Obama, and would really convince some of the commitment that U.S. will stay regardless of who is in the White House. So that would be something that it would be, going forward. And then I think on the deterrence side, I think the strike. What's important would be to strike a good balance between effective deterrence, which is, obviously you need certain capabilities, and on the other side, preventing spiral and escalation. So we're dealing with something very difficult, which is we need to deter, and for that we need to be clear and have the capabilities. But on the other hand, we don't want escalation, so we need to prevent that from happening. So we need to strike a fairly good balance. And as moving forward, this will be something important, and we want to make sure that we have the institution that can make the decisions and execute accordingly. And I think for deterrence to work, a lot of the scholars said that there are three conditions for deterrence success, which is to have the capabilities and also the intentions to use that capabilities if attacked. And the second one is to be able to communicate to the other side that you have the capabilities and the will to use that capability. And the third is to have a mutual understanding of the situation, meaning that if you don't cross this line, Japan will not attack or counterattack. But if you do cross this line, that this is what Japan and the United States will do. And I think the US and Japan are working on the capability side of things very well. The will, intention, I think needs the domestic and some more discussions on what exactly is the timing, what conditions, under what situation Japan together with the US is going to use this. And thirdly, we need to be able to communicate, so decrease the likelihood of miscalculations, and also to a certain extent reassure the adversary or potential adversary that bad things will not happen if they themselves restrain themselves. Okay, so we need to do a lot more about the intentions part, making sure that we have the intent and also the communication and also the mutual understanding. I've interviewed quite a lot of people in Washington a few weeks ago, and I think a lot of people agree that we are now facing a very serious situation. But at the same time, a lot of people say that on the side of China's intention, there are a lot of uncertainties as well. We don't want that to be the case. We need to understand the intentions of China very well moving forward. Even in order to deter, we need to understand the will of the other side. So other side, a lot of things are still moving on, but I think on the practical side, the coordinating of the command and control would be important. And I think it's difficult to know how urgent we need to be. Are we being too urgent? How are we being too slow? And I think this sense of urgency is making people sort of feeling that we need to be prepared in case something happens, which is a correct way to approach this probably. But at the same time, we don't want to make wrong choices by being too hasty as well. And I think you need to understand that Japan has made a tremendous big decision and acquiring capabilities that it didn't have before. So I think, spending some time to have a good discussion is quite important. So although there is a sort of a deadline for the US side, I don't think we should, hastily make wrong decisions in the sort of the fear of losing speed or momentum, as it were. I think for a democracy, I think it's very important that the people are behind our defense policies and security policies. Unless the people quite understand why we're doing what we're doing, we will not have the support. And Japan is increasing a lot of well, maybe we need to increase the tax as well, but we are going to be supporting this defense budget. And if we are going to act, we need the support of the people. And I think if we believe in the institution of democracy, I think having a due process is extremely important when you actually do decide to have this. So those are the things that probably I wouldn't say stumbling blocks per se, but something that needs to be. We need to make sure that we actually have them correct and right going forward.
Thank you, Chikako-san. So I already have 12 questions in the queue, so we'll get right into it. First question, your dissertation reader is posing you a question,
Oh,
so
no.
I'm going to pick it up first. Good morning, Dick. Thank you so much for listening in. So actually, his question actually is overlapped by several other people's questions too. So his question is really, it's about U.S.-Japan ROK.
Okay.
Trilateral relationship. So we're about, as you know, 6 months out, since the Camp David summit, like truly historic summit happened in Washington. But at the same time, we're already looking at the Korean National Assembly's election later in the year. So his question, and there's one more question that are closer to this. How optimistic are you about the near-term and mid-term prospects for Japan ROK relationship, and also, to a larger extent, the U.S.-Japan ROK trilateral partnership?
I am hopeful, which might be different from analytical assessment, but I am hopeful for several reasons. And then the ROK, and I forgot to, I didn't mention ROK US as something that we've already achieved, but I think the Japan ROK relations and also the US-Japan ROK relations that we've sort of cemented at Camp David and in other occasions, I think that was a tremendous benefit and help to stabilize the region. And I think there are two aspects to Japan ROK relations. One is that, of course, there are things that we need to overcome from the past history, which need to be worked further. And for the two nations to actually feel that we have overcome, regardless of the legal issues at hand, I think we need to be doing more on both sides so that we actually do feel that we are put the past behind us and moving forward. The second thing is the closer the reason, one of the very strong reasons that the countries coalesce, form coalition or alliance, is the existence of a mutual threat. And South Korea has been very hesitant to name China as a threat. And the most obvious reason that it didn't see China as a primary threat for long, and I don't think it still does, because it has the North Korea to need to take care of. But more recently, I think it's seeing China's pressure and maybe some of the less beneficial aspects of China's influence on North Korea. For example, over the THAAD deployment a few years ago, and then the economic sanction that followed. And the South Korean leaders, as well as many people in the security community, are talking about security beyond the peninsula and talking about Indo-Pacific. So some of the things that the three countries agreed upon about maritime security, needing to have a region based on the rule of law. Those are the things that we share with South Korea. And, I've had several workshops with the South Korean scholars things, and they do see a role that they can play for the region, which is, not just to counter a pressure from China, but also make sure that the region stays the way they want. So I am optimistic in the sense that regardless of who might be in the Blue House or what would happen in the Parliament, these things are significant trends, and it has been an increasing trend in South Korea. Of course, we need to work, and then we need to be sensitive to why the South Koreans have these reservations as well on our part.
Thank you. And there's also a couple of questions about what's going on in the United States. So if you can share your thoughts on if Donald Trump becomes president next year, what's your take on the security scenario in the Northeast Asia? He's been making headline about how if NATO allies don't pay up, U.S. do have no obligation to defend them, even if they're attacked by Russia, and that makes alliance around the world, like allies, quite worried. So, what's your take?
I think the allies are worried, and that was one of the reasons why we are seeing, a lot of coalitions being built, alignment happening in the region. And so I think in some ways the countries in the region realized that we were too dependent on the U.S. and that U.S. is no longer able to sustain what it could do in the past. And it's not just because of the capabilities, but the sense that U.S. is doing too much, I think is fairly widespread in the United States and amongst the people. So it could be Mr. Trump, but the people that are supporting Mr. Trump it's not just to do with his person, just one person. And I think it will be quite uncertain for a while. As I said, the countries in the region are already kind of jumpy, and the sense of urgency is already there. And not just the allies, but I'm sure the security committee in China is also sort of trying to figure out what Mr. Trump might do. So in some ways, we're all kind of being kind of quiet and holding our breath, which might lead to more stability. But usually, uncertainties are not a good news for international relations. So I would say that, for going on, that would be quite a dire situation. But the upside might be we might see the coalition amongst U.S. allies get sort of a stronger. One of the reasons why Japan did what it did, and many trilaterals and some multilaterals together with ASEAN and cooperation with NATO, building fighters with Italy. That was sort of try to prepare the region for certain changes in the U.S. Administration, or U.S. policy. I hope Mr. Trump is not serious to say that what I think the strength of the United States rests on its ability to lead and to have a credible power to lead together with allies for what we stand for. So I am hopeful that if he were to be elected, if the American people ought to elect him again, then he would stand for the United States interests, which I am sure is together with the allies.
So you mentioned about, absolutely, and that's what we're all hoping. So, but in your as a part of your opening remarks, and then also in the response to this question, you talked about Japan's own effort
Mm,
to, reach out to in the minilaterals, but then also OSA kind of
mm,
assistance and corporations with the other countries in other parts of the world. And there are some countries who, it is like quite easy to see the connection, like investment in its relation with the Philippines.
mm,
But there are some that are not immediately obvious, such as Mongolia.
mm,
So let's say pick Philippines and Mongolia. Philippines are more of a natural extension of, yes, South China Sea, important sealing country, but then Mongolia is kind of a landlocked and
mhm,
also, geographically quite far from Japan. So how do those, how do those, the fact that the Japan kind of focuses on these two, seemingly very different condition countries, um, tell you about where Japan's priority in
mm,
the capacity building with for
mhm,
those
mhm.
countries?
That's a very good question, and I'd like to thank the person who asked me, but I don't think I have a good answer, but it's a very interesting question. And the countries that Japan picked, most of them, as you say, are maritime, to get to do with maritime domain awareness. But also what Japan has been emphasizing is give an option and also to have good practice. And of course, although it's a land, it doesn't, it's not a maritime state per se, but it does sit next to China. So obviously, strengthening the countries around China seems to be one of the things that Japan is doing. And then the other thing is to have an awareness, not just about the maritime, but also from the air and also land about the situation that's happening in the region so that we would be more aware of we increase the situational awareness. So it seems that the situational awareness of, maritime, number one, but also air and even underwater and also in the land domain seems to be one of the priorities, and also the regionally, it would be around the sea lines of communication and shipping lanes, but also in the areas around China. One of the things that's interesting is that Prime Minister Kishida made a speech in India a few months ago, and in that he sort of re-emphasized the importance of the FOIP, the Free and Open Indo-Pacific, and it was a very flexible definition of the pursuit of the FOIP. And he used the word, the rule of law, and also whoever is signed on to this open, meaning it's not exclusive, but inclusive, and the rule of law. A rule of law is something that other countries might want to say liberal international order or rule-based order, but he used the word rule of law, which might be something slightly different, but it's very flexible. And the fact that it's flexible means that I think Japan also wants to increase the number of countries that Japan can partner with. So it's a slightly different from the, which area of a prioritization, but the number seems to be important. Having more friends and partnership around the region seems to be another objective that Japan has.
Thank you. And so, by the way, that was like combining the two different questions and
Oh, okay.
kind of putting it together.
All right.
But I thought those were kind of running through the same, same thread of
Mhm.
why Japan focuses on a particular country for its capacity building and OSA. Um, we have been talking about Whirlwind, about what Japan has been doing, Japan's outlook on a certain situation. But obviously, as we all know, all very aware, there are three active, very tense situations that are happening in the world. Ukraine, Middle East, Israel, Hamas, and not really kinetic yet, but tension is always there, Taiwan. So what are your take on Japan's outlooks for what it should do, what it needs to do in terms of cooperating with the actors in those area in those three areas?
I think Japan is already doing some of the assistance to help the NATO countries in the case of Ukraine, probably less for the situation in Gaza. But obviously, amongst the three, the Taiwan is the one that looms the largest and is the concern. And that is, basically the reason why Japan put this national security strategy rather in a hurried way. I think there was sense of urgency, as it were, because Japan felt, and the United States also, that they may not be ready should something happen. So in the case of Taiwan, that is, a little bit difficult because, as I said, there is no consensus of what should be done if the conflict did break out. And I think that's something that we need to be doing moving forward. But some of the public opinion poll shows, both in the United States and Japan, that people want to do this in a diplomatic way. And in the US, supporting Taiwan's own defense by giving it more weapons. There is a fairly significant support. But the number for those that says that US should send troops to Taiwan decreases. I think it was about, I have the figures, I don't have it somewhere, but and in the Japan case also, fighting together with the U.S. by invoking the the situation of critical threat is very low as well. So both countries are concerned about China, the situation in Taiwan, but significantly much lower number of people actually support sending troops or sending not just troops, but sending defense force in any way in the Taiwan contingency. So I do think that unilateral change to the situation in the Taiwan Strait should be condemned, and that would be not welcomed. But I think, I think that the consensus is not there. Decision has not been made about what Japan will do or what US will do or should do in both countries. And I think that's precisely something that we need to talk about. And, the US-Japan alliance has been a very successful alliance. We have not had to invoke, Article 5 ever, right? So we have not had a war that we need to, fight against or attack on Japan. Ever since the treaty was put in place. So it's been a very successful alliance, and because of the deterrence effect that the two countries were put together. So I think it's extremely important that we try to deter so that we don't have to, start talking about what do we need to do now the war has happened. But I think we need to do a lot of, talk, and not just amongst the leadership, but I think we as citizens of, United States and Japan needs to seriously think what is the cost that we are willing to bear in order to defend what we think is important. And we need to also decide what it is that it is important, and talk about Taiwan in that regard as well.
So, this is a great segue to this one question that I thought was very interesting. So we spent so far most of our time talking about the effort to deter, right? But then other side of the ledger is the kind of a exploring the area of cooperation in the time of the tension. And that's another way to deter. And especially in case of Japan, we spent a healthy amount of time talking about, security concerns from China, tensions in Taiwan Strait. Those are those are basically neighboring areas. So neighbors are neighbors, and we can't really erase the fact that we have a certain set of neighbors geographically, and those neighbors won't change. NATO, US, although they may be an important allies and security partners, they don't live in Japan's space geographically. So is there any thought that you detect in a current, Japanese discourse amongst the policy thinkers about invest in more of those exploring the area of cooperation side of the ledger for, vis-a-vis, deterrent sides of the ledger that we've been talking about?
Cooperation with the potential adversaries?
Well,
Is that the
cooperation
question?
and the
Or cooperation?
more of a regional cooperation. So I think
Mhm,
I think something like, there's always that Japan, ROK, China, you know,
mhm,
cooperative like dialogue
mhm,
framework,
mhm,
is there more will on the part of Tokyo to kind of invest more in that a little bit for to, diffuse tensions, in that line of thinking, I think. And in that line, it's Japan's partnership with India.
mhm.
How does where does that country sit in terms of Japanese security strategy?
I think India has always been an important potential, partner for quite a while, for a long time, maybe going back to 10, 20 years. Uh, I think because of the power that it could have in the future and is growing as an economic power, but also a political power, and also some leadership in the global south as well. But I think that's maybe a bit more also as in order to, I wouldn't say deter, but also on making friends in order to be able to balance against the potential country with the China being in mind. But the difference between India and other countries is not an US ally. So some of the things that the Quad, with together with Australia and India, US, Japan have decided go much more on the side of like making sure of technological development in the emerging and disruptive technologies and some of the digital trade, which US and Japan have already put in place as it's called CORE, CORE, in a partnership, and making sure that the digital commerce go in a safe manner. So a lot of the things that the three allies, US, Japan, and Australia, decide together with India goes on to making sure that the research and development goes into these technology and making sure that some of the rules of this. So in some ways, this would contribute to making the region more stable in the sense that there are ways to develop, not just about competition, but in the end, if the countries can develop these technologies, that would be a good thing. On the part of including China in all of this, the Japan, ROK, South Korea, China have been a little bit less active in recent years. With the Korea has been more eager to do this. I think its perceptions of China have changed quite significantly over the recent years. So I'm not sure how much appetite there is into pursuing this. I haven't been following this very well. But on the side of Japan, China, there's always this sense that Japan needs to have at least a workable relations with China. China is still a very important economic partner for Japan. And of course, realizing that there are problems, bilateral problems and differences, I think there is a sense that communication should be there. There should be a working relations, a good working relations in there. So I think reaching out to China bilaterally, but together with other countries, and it would be important for the allies to be together to have a better understanding and better relations with China. And then on that score, I think US is putting a lot of effort in recently to having bilateral summit, bilateral foreign minister, state secretary dialogues, and those
Mhm.
things I think would contribute in making sure, even though there were differences, it doesn't mean that we need to fight them out, right? So and miscalculations, a lot of conflict and bad things happen based on miscalculations. So that I think
Mhm.
is important to reassure and make sure that things don't happen. So I think that's already underway, but I think we need to do more of that.
Mhm. Thank you for that. Thank you for that thought. One of the things that Japan really has been actively seeking since it's really like since its first national security strategy back in 2013 is really its engagement with the European partners. And that's currently kind of we see that one of those big fruits unfolding in Japan going into a joint development of its new generation of fighter jets with the
Mm,
Italy and
mm,
the UK. But then also there's always a constant discussion of whether Japan should be or Japan wants to be a part of AUKUS, arrangement as well.
mm.
So in those, what are your thoughts in that in that, and more specifically, do you hear any challenges that this trilateral development program has been facing? Namely, one of the things that changed about Japan's policy is the export of its defense equipment.
Mm.
Since 2014, they revised recently, and then they recently revised the operations of implementation of the principles again to allow some of those license produce finished manufactured product back to the originally licensed countries. So would that be a kind of encouragement for Japan to further that discussion a step further and look at something like this new fighter jet, which is jointly developed by UK and with UK and Italy,
Mm.
to basically use that, allow that to be exported to the countries outside of Japan, UK, Italy.
Um, I think so. I think so. I think when Japan, uh, lifted some of the restriction on the export of a weapon, I think Japan was more hopeful that there would be more joint programs, but it didn't quite happen for the reasons that practically there were a lot of paperwork, a lot of things that needed to be negotiated, which made it very difficult to pursue this. But the fact that Japan is having this together with Italy and other countries, and I think these countries and Japan have a different kind of equipment requirement, meaning the situation that we have a need shorter range fighters, etc., which is slightly different from the case of U.S., which it needs to operate from a distance as well. So there is some synergy in the defense requirement of these countries. So if they were able to produce more, and I think the case in Ukraine showed that it's very important to have indigenous, industry, defense industry, uh, able to produce. And Japan is a small country in terms of, it's been restricting its defense industry. It hasn't been exporting, so it's a fairly small defense industry, and it could not survive on its own. So to have these cooperation with some of the partnership countries would mean that there would be a production line for some of the equipment, and maybe just having it in the three countries is not enough in order to sustain this production line. So I think it would contribute. Of course, some of the political considerations must be made to which countries to export and things, of course. But in general, this would make Japan and other countries more resilient in some ways if there was a conflict to occur.
Thank you. And I just realized that we're quickly approaching to the end of the hour. Um, so this will be probably a big enough question to be the appropriate last question for to present and pose to you. So there are a couple of issues that we have, we've been talking about specifics in the national security strategy and how that's been implemented so far and what are the challenges of the roadblocks. There are other topics that we didn't even discuss, mainly because if we go on going down that road, it'll be a whole another hour that we could possibly spend. But one of the thing is that the chances that Japan may have to make an adjustment to the trend line that has been laid out in national security strategies and the factors for those. Maybe the factor that might force Japan to make some of those adjustments. Those are some of those economy, its own economy, demographic challenges, and the financial market. Yen has been, value of yen is falling. It's so much more expensive to import anything to Japan now.
Mm.
And so how do you see that may force Japanese government to face face the I guess the unpreferred option of having to revise some of these commitments that it made in the
Mm.
national security strategy.
Mm. I think
Maybe
that
some of them may not be short term, but
okay. I think the commitment to support the US and to realize and protect and maintain uh, rule-based order in the region and have this hope that this is doable would be sustained. And I think the hope for the region would not change. But the first thing that might be a challenge would be the one of the how to finance the budget. I think many people know that the Kishida administration is going through a very hard political situation at the moment to do with the scandals of his own party, the Liberal Democratic Party. His rating has gone down to the 20s, which is a very low number. Although I used to be a reporter and I used to cover Prime Minister Takeshita, who was down at 8%, but he was still there. So 20% is much higher than 8%. So I think there's still, some ways to go. But nevertheless, this means that it's very difficult to ask for any kind of tax increase, which I think is inevitable in some ways if you are to sustain this for a long time. It's not just about 5 years, but it's for a long time. So, those things will be difficult. And as Japan has a very good healthcare system, it's a very good, longevity country, but that means the pressure on those budget will be extremely high and will be increasing in the coming years as well. And one thing that population is a very serious problem. Where now from a few years ago, the number of household is going down, not just the population, which means that the economy is shrinking. So Prime Minister Kishida has put in place some measures to make sure that some assistance so that the people who do want to have children can have children in the sense of financial and childcare support. But that's going to take a lot of the money. So it's basically to do with the tax, pension, healthcare, and support for the families and for children and the defense. So I think the constituency might feel rather if this urgency disappears, I think there would be a lot of argument. Why do we need to spend so much? Or why should we cut our pension in order to ready for a war that may or may not happen? So that would be a challenge. But on the other hand, some of the things that are really vital for this defense of Japan, but also to sustain a war if it happened, doesn't have to be very, very fancy. Right. So some of the things, a lot of people talk about concrete versus forces, but hardening the airfields would be vitally important so that they are resilient and operational, even in the times of war. Dispersing air bases, those are extremely important, politically very costly if you are to say that we want to open up a new, a big base in the north. But I think that's something that is needed to be done. Dispersing, we need to maybe disperse some of the airplanes in the initial stages of the war to other countries, to Darwin maybe. But these things doesn't have to have the financial backing per se, but it's extremely important to have shelters, making sure that the runways are, hardened, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, the 2% mark, and maybe Mr. Trump might not be happy, but I think a lot of things can be done even with the less of the budget, even if that were to happen.
great. Thank you for that thought. And it's right at 10:30 right now. So thank you for finishing up finishing right on time. But look, I still have like 11 questions in the queue, and then I'm so sorry for those of you who took time to write in questions, but I could not get to. But thank you again, Chikako-san, for joining me this morning.
Yuki-san, and
And it was so much fun. We should do this
yes,
again.
yes,
And
definitely.
And
We can
for
talk
those of
about a
you,
lot of things that I was hoping to, so I'm sorry for that, but
yeah,
hope there will be another chance. And thank you
there will
so
be
much,
future
everyone, for
opportunities.
asking great questions. Great questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And then thank you everyone for joining us this morning or this evening, wherever you were joining from. And especially thank you for all of you who took time to write in questions. There are some great questions that are being asked. And we very much enjoyed entertaining as many of them as I could. Just to give you a preview, week of March 11th, date to be determined, but we will have another webinar focuses on economic security and economic coercion and what Japan has tried to do with it. And last but not least, of the session of this webinar series, it will focus on Japan's role in upholding more of a multinational institutions and framework with the particular focus on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. That is again, time is to be determined, but date will be March 18th. So please keep an eye on for those. And Chikako-san, if you have time, please do join and ask the tough questions
Yes, yes.
to the speakers. And with that, thank you everyone for joining. And this concludes this webinar. Thank you very much. And enjoy